Okay, so ready to dive into another stack of Palo Alto City Council meeting minutes.
Always. Let's be honest, most people wouldn't call these page turners.
Right. But they're full of this hyper-local drama that actually impacts all of us living here.
Totally. It's like your neighborhood, but with zoning regulations.
Exactly. And this time, we're talking about the meetings from August 5th, 12th, and 19th. Buckle up, because we found some real gems in there.
Oh, yeah. We're talking historic preservation battles, affordable housing showdowns, even parking lot
The
controversies.
whole shebang. So, for anyone who hasn't been glued to these minutes like we have, what should they be listening for? Like, what are the big takeaways this time around?
I think the theme, if we had to give it one, is the tension between old Palo Alto and the new. You know how a city with so much history makes room for, well, Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And we see that playing out right off the bat with the Historic Resources Board.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
Caroline Willis is stepping down. She's been a real advocate for, like, stronger preservation rules, even suggesting demolition protection.
Which, as you can imagine, stirred up some strong feelings. People get protective of their property rights.
For sure. But it's the candidates vying for her spot that really caught my eye.
Yeah.
We've got an architect who's obsessed with Bryant Park in New York.
Interesting comparison, like trying to bring that East Coast elegance to Palo Alto.
Right. Then there's a Stanford professor,
Yeah.
all about something called embodied carbon, which,
Basically the carbon footprint of building materials.
Yeah.
Big concern these days, especially in sustainable architecture.
good to know. And then, to shake things up even more, Barry Katz, a historian who straight up called those historical plaques pathetic gestures.
Yeah, he wasn't holding back. But see, Katz is interesting. He wants to bridge that gap between Palo Alto's past and its tech present, like recognizing Silicon Valley's influence as something worth, preserving.
That's such a fascinating concept. Could you imagine, like, a server farm being a landmark someday? It really makes you think about what we consider historic in a place like this.
Totally. And for residents, these aren't just philosophical debates. These historic resource board decisions, they impact property values, development rights, the whole character of their neighborhoods.
Yeah, it makes you realize those board meetings have some serious weight to them.
Absolutely. And it reflects this larger question so many cities are grappling with. How do you balance progress with, protecting those unique qualities that make a place special?
Not an easy task. And speaking of balancing progress, let's talk about a story that really took center stage in these meetings. The whole Buena Vista Mobile Home Park redevelopment.
Oh, yeah, that's a complicated one. Gets to the heart of some really tough issues.
It does. So we're talking about replacing these older mobile homes with new ones and adding a 61-unit apartment building.
Sounds like a win-win on paper, right? More affordable housing, better living conditions.
You'd think so, except then you bring in the human element, the residents themselves.
And that's where things get, well, less clear-cut.
Yeah, and way more emotional.
Right. Some residents were, let's just say, not thrilled about these plans. To put it mildly, they actually accused the housing authority of, intimidation tactics, unfair appraisals, basically not being straight with them about what was happening.
Which is a really tough accusation to hear. And it gets to this bigger question of, like, who are these projects actually benefiting?
Right. Is it about providing more affordable housing, or is it about meeting deadlines, securing funding?
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like those things are at odds.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, like, how much say do residents really have in all of this?
And even beyond that, how comfortable do they feel speaking up? I mean, one resident, Mara Esquivel, she actually said that some of her neighbors were too afraid of retaliation to voice their concerns publicly.
Wow. That speaks volumes right there.
Yeah, it really highlights the power imbalance at play. You've got these residents, many of whom have called Buena Vista home for years, maybe even decades, now facing displacement, uncertainty.
Right. And in a city like Palo Alto, where affordability is already a huge issue, it's not just about losing a house, it's losing a lifeline.
Exactly. And this is where I think Councilmember Koo really surprised people. She's generally very pro-affordable housing, but even she seemed, well, conflicted. She went out of her way to acknowledge the residents' anxieties about all this.
She even apologized for talking about demolition in front of them. Which, I mean,
A small gesture, maybe, but it kind of showed that she understood this wasn't just about square footage and budgets. These were real people's lives.
it's kind of wild how these meetings jump from like these really heartfelt resident stories, to super specific city planning stuff.
Right, like 1 minute it's affordable housing, the next gets parking regulations.
Exactly. Speaking of which, that was another hot topic in these meetings. Specifically, the plan to remove parking on El Camino Real.
Ah, yes. The battle of the bike lanes. Always a crowd pleaser.
Tell me about it. But it's more than just bike lanes versus parking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about, well, what kind of city do we want to be?
Exactly. It forces you to prioritize walkable neighborhoods or easy access for cars, supporting local businesses, or, encouraging alternative transportation.
Right, and the city's stuck trying to make everyone happy, throwing out ideas like employee parking permits in residential areas, more buses, maybe even those little shuttles.
It's like they're trying to put out a fire with thimbles. A lot of these solutions, they feel kind of...
Band-aidy.
Exactly. Like they address the immediate problem, but not the larger issue.
Which is?
Well, how do we plan for the future, right? Palo Alto's growing. People want to live here, work here, shop here. But something's got to give. We can't keep adding cars without consequences.
It's like that game, what is it called, Tetris, where you got to keep making things fit, but
That's
eventually...
exactly. Eventually, it's game over. And speaking of things not fitting, remember the Castilla school expansion?
Oh, yeah. That was back on the agenda. What happened there? More traffic concerns.
Yep. Seems like their whole no net new trips promise didn't really pan out.
You mean they underestimated how much their fancy new buildings would impact traffic? Shocking.
Pretty much. And it's a good example of how these decisions, even ones that seem hyperlocal, like a school expansion.
They have this ripple effect.
Exactly. Suddenly, it's not just about the school anymore. It's about the neighborhood. It's about, those parents driving their kids to school, clogging up those already crowded streets.
And probably circling around for parking, too.
Bingo. Which, by the way, is exactly the point Councilmember Q made.
Oh, yeah. What did she say?
Basically, she called out the city for, being all about supporting local businesses, but then being so quick to sacrifice parking for those very same businesses.
I mean, she's not wrong. Where are those employees supposed to park?
Exactly. It's like pick a lane, Palo Alto. Literally.
That's a good point. We should think about those trade-offs, right?
All the time.
So after all that, the parking wars, the mobile home park drama, what's the big takeaway for those of us listening, trying to make sense of it all?
I think it boils down to this. Palo Alto's changing, always has been, probably always will be. And these meetings, messy as they might seem, they're where those changes get debated, decided.
And where residents can actually weigh in on those changes.
Exactly. So if you care about what this city's going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years...
You better pay attention to what's happening at City Hall.
100%. Because you know what they say, all politics is local.
Truer words have never been spoken.